Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dedrick Perkins, and I would like to thank you for joining the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity webinar series. NCORE is a part of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And as I stated, my name is Dedrick Perkins. I am the Senior Program Coordinator, and I'm so delighted to welcome you and to be your host this afternoon. Our hope is that we continue the conference tradition of working to improve racial, ethnic, and intercultural relations on college campuses and community organizations by providing virtual learning with opportunities like this one that you'll be in today. For those of you joining us for the 2023-24 season, NCORE has monthly webinars on the first and last Wednesday of each month, with occasional exceptions like the holidays, which are coming up. Some webinars are free and others are offered at a modest fee of $25. Our next webinar is entitled La Hermanidad, Connecting Mental Health Resources with DEI Work Through Storytelling. And that's presented by Diana Galvez and Delinia Acosta, MSW. It will be on Wednesday, January 29th, 2024. So we'll be in the new year, guys, everyone. So before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Always remain muted unless you are requested to unmute. If you need to utilize closed captioning, make sure your settings are set to on. We ask that your background have no moving images or flashing lights, and please report any specific tech, accessibility, or any other operational concerns via direct message to me, the session host. We will have a short Q&A at the end of the session, so if you could please use the question and answer feature, and we will have some live Q&A, so we'll call on you and go through that when the time comes at the end of the session. So today, our feature presenters are Uni Ramanana Juina and Tyler Figueroa, and they are presenting on the topic of Gen Z's identity development through mass media. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Is it cool to start sharing our screen? Okay, awesome. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Is this showing up on screens for everyone? Okay, awesome. So welcome to our presentation, New Kids on the Block, an exploration of Gen Z's identity development through mass media. Quite a mouthful, but a super iconic, I would say a super iconic title. And my name is Tyler Figueroa. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Assistant Director for Marketing and Communications at the University of Oklahoma. And I am joined by my wonderful and talented collaborator and thought partner, Onitsuwa. So let's hear it up for her.
Hi all. So my name is Uni, and I'm currently working as a technical consultant in Tulsa, and I just graduated from OU this year.
And a big component of our presentation today is to explore Gen Z's identity development in relation to mass media. A big component of this is Uni and I both belong to Gen Z, so it's our generation. We're very passionate. We're very excited to be part of Gen Z. I feel like we're doing a lot of good in the world, a lot of change making. So that's really cool. Alongside that, it's very important to understand how identity formation is developed. I think it helps a lot of people, whether you're a traditionalist, a Gen Xer, Boomer, et cetera, to understand Gen Z. And I think a big component is like, we're going to be in workspaces together. We're going to be in other spaces together. It's important to understand how we communicate, how we resolve conflict, et cetera. And I think this is a good avenue for people who might not be as accustomed to our generation to get to know us. And we would also like to disclaim that this is not representative of all of us. This is me and Uni's perspective and lived experiences, and we do incorporate other generations, and we really try to do our best to give grace, to acknowledge history, technological advances, etc. So thank you all for coming, and we're very excited. So this is the inclusion statement at NCORE. So we'll give you a few moments to sit with this, and we will go ahead and move to our next slide as well. All right, let's go ahead and move on. And this is the land acknowledgement. I must acknowledge we ourselves are not in NOLA at the moment. However, we would really love to acknowledge the indigenous communities there. I am at the University of Oklahoma. Uni attended this university as well, and we would like to acknowledge the indigenous communities here alongside throughout the United States of America and globally. And so we thank you, and we are very grateful. And Uni, I'll let you go ahead and talk about this graphic.
This is actually the title page we had when we first started this presentation. It was just really cute and had a lot of elements that we thought represented Gen Z. Unfortunately, we transitioned to the NCORE template, so we had to say goodbye to this piece of art, but we just wanted you to see it. It's just really nice.
And a basis for that was actually to ensure digital accessibility. So overall, a good thing. It's one of those things that if you're mindful in the first place of building your content or technology, etc., if you have digital accessibility or universal design in mind, it will eliminate that you're not losing anything because it was made intentionally and for persons who will need it. So are you ready to present, Uni?
Only if you are.
Of course, get in. We're only presenting. Is everyone else presenting? Can we see like some reacts and everything, please? Is people ready? Yeah, okay. I'm ready. So let's go ahead and break down our generational timeline. So we start with our traditionalist era from 1920 to 1945. We have our baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. They've, like, I'm sure a lot of us have heard, like, in the media, you're gonna hear a lot about the baby boomers, the millennials, and the Gen Z. I feel like those are kind of like the hot topics right now when talking about generations. So following baby boomers, we have our Gen Xers, 1965 to 1980, our millennials, who they say love Harry Potter, coffee, Starbucks, all those things. So a part of this component of the presentation is we do want to incorporate humor too. So, there might be a few jokes and stuff here and there. So we have our millennials followed by Gen Z, 1997 through 2012. And then we have our upcoming generation, Alpha Gen. So I'm really excited to see where they're headed. I think kind of some of the thoughts is that they're going to be very technologically advanced. I also believe some research is showing that they're a bit more to themselves, at least less social in comparison to previous generations. And I think we can look at historical and timely events to like see why that would happen. And another component is that this timeline does have date fluctuations as well. So who is Generation Z? We are considered the first truly digital native generation. We're highly diverse, and once again, we're born between 1997 to 2012 with some wiggle room. Some values, traits, and causes about our generation is we're change makers or disruptors. I would say a big component is like, of course, of this presentation is media, and I would say something very, very, it seems very popular for our generation was the Hunger Games, Divergent, and other like Percy Jackson. So other medias that explored what is systems of oppression, how does youth like tackle that? How do we dismantle that or change it? So within that, I believe our generation has a big focus on sociocultural and political justice acts. So this can include gender, class, disability, and so many more aspects. We are the most highly educated generation. We really value self-expression and autonomy in both our social lives, professional lives, academic, and our digital lives. And another component is there's a big aspect on mental health awareness and advocacy. And we also acknowledge that a big component is that previous generations did not have access to all the information we did have, and also the way that discourse can happen. We're able to talk and acknowledge issues such as that a lot more.
And so going back on the values that Gen Z have, we'll look a little bit into the metrics and numbers of how that happened. So all the numbers we're showing here will be focused on the United States because that's where we currently are. And it's a lot easier to put it into perspective when we have a rigid scope. Tyler mentioned that Gen Z is one of the most educated generation, and it kind of makes sense because the generations before us, millennials, Gen Xers, they were also highly educated, and those are the parents of the current Gen Z. So among 17 to 22-year-olds in 2018, Gen Zers had a record high college enrollment. So that was like 57% as compared to 52% in millennials and 43% in Gen Xers. So this is mostly due to the idea that education is going to help you succeed. So Gen Xers kept that in mind, millennials kept that in mind, so that the current Gen Z you see now are highly educated. It is important to note, however, though, that with the advent of social media and technological advances, there are so much more opportunities for career-wise for Gen Zers to make money without having to rely on a traditional 4-year college. So college enrollment is definitely not as high as it can be. There's also the topic of diversity within Gen Zers. We can see that Gen Zers in 2019, their proportions or the diversity, and that's like ethnic diversity, is a lot higher than, let's say, early boomers. And this is mostly due to the wave of immigration that happened in the 90s. They had children. There's a lot more openness between different cultures. So this led to a very diverse and very open-minded, very culturally aware Gen Z. Next slide, please. And going into a little bit of how Gen Z is politically oriented, they are allies, they are change makers, disruptors. A lot more Gen Zers think that the government should be doing more to solve problems, and this is because technology has made it so that we Gen Zers are aware of everything that is happening around the world. Something happens on the other side of the world, within seconds, it's on Twitter, within seconds, we see it. And we have the ability to do research, to look into both sides of a conflict, and to decide for ourselves what we believe is right or wrong. So it makes us more likely to spur action because we know both sides of the story. Climate consciousness is also a big thing because as Gen Zers, we are going to be living in this planet in the next 50, 75 years. Our children would be the ones who will inherit this earth. So we have the duty to make sure that we keep it livable. Tyler, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you said that very beautifully. So thank you, Uni. So we've talked about some of the values and traits and qualities we have. Let's talk about some stereotypes and misconceptions. Gen Z, we're soft, we're sensitive, we're snowflakes, we're addicted to our phones, we don't know how to socialize, we're lazy, we're unloyal, we don't value tradition, and we're individualistic. And I think a whole thing to acknowledge within this is that these are based, stereotypes and misconceptions are based off of perspective, some lived experiences. If you see something, you might just assume that's status quo. And so I want to deconstruct some of these. So let's go ahead and start with sensitivity, softness, or overly politically correctness. I think here you see the sticker weird. I think Gen Z very much, we are weird, but within that, we want everyone to be themselves. So it's not necessarily like the weird kids versus the cool kids. It's like we're all cool and weird ourselves. It's very important for us to feel validated and empowered in our true, authentic selves. Within that, laziness and unloyalness. While it's true that previous generations typically would be in a workspace for maybe 20, 30 plus years, a lot of times millennials and Gen Z, we very much will maybe stay a max of 3 years if a place isn't serving us. And this is not laziness or unloyalness. It's, I think we really recognize the immediacy of our world, the heaviness of our world, especially if you are a person from a marginalized community. It makes you want to value yourself a lot more. I would also argue, in some data we'll get into a bit further, shows that we're actually one of the most socially diverse populations amongst the generations. And I think a testament to just kind of us is our humor. And I think you can see that through the Kim K crying meme. Like, crying is supposed to be this sad thing, but we've made it something that, like, it's iconic. A lot of people could just see this and be like, I know, Kim, like, but like why? I think that's the big thing is why. I don't know. We've kind of made humor this thing, how we rationalize and approach things. And then lastly, I would say with kind of tradition, I think when you are, I'm gonna say the driver's seat, when you are the generation in the youngest demographic driver's seat, I think a lot of times you are looked at as different because you're challenging a lot of the status quos and norms. So as I've said earlier, a lot of times in media, we'll hear of, a big divide amongst the boomers specifically and Gen Z. There's this big thing. And if you think about it, boomers at one point were, I'm going to say stereotypically, a lot of people will say boomers are conservative, not progressive, etc. At a point in time, that would have been the opposite, right? At a point in time, Generation Z can fall into that category as well, that stereotype. So it's important as we're establishing identity in our relationships is that these fluctuate and then our perceptions will fluctuate. So Gen Alpha, one day they will be in the driver's seat. So what is their perception going to be on my generation? I think it makes you practice a bit more humility and empathy when considering the generations that we've had. And so we're going to show you a clip from a show called Generation. Generation is currently, I believe, on Tubi for free 99. However, there are commercials just to warn you. It was previously housed on HBO Max. However, I'm going to say like it has a lot to do, it's being displaced from that source was due to a lot of issues with honoring art and writers. So I would definitely encourage us to be mindful of that. That's a current issue the creative industry is facing. And we're seeing a big issue of a lot of shows being removed from platforms they were originally on. So what does that look like for the freedom of art and the protections of those persons? And specifically in this scene, to give you a premise and to give you a content warning is the scenario right now is that they believe they are in a potential school shooting. So if this content is too much, please do feel free to leave the session to rejoin at a later time. We want you to feel safe and comfortable here. So we are going to start the video, and thank you so much.
I think there's a shooter outside. They're gonna come in. I'm too young to die. I'm freaking out.
Carry on.
Oh no, I'm good. I'm just having fun with my dad.
So yeah, that was a snippet, and we picked this because it felt like a very nuanced way of exploring what is Gen ID, Gen Z's identity or the perception of Gen Z identity currently. And so what was really cool is you have a big disconnect. We enter this scene and we're very much in the moment. It's a very dramatic, it's a very emotionally charged scene. We're seeing her freak out because we're under the impression that she's fearful of the school shooting, which is also a major problem that our society, Western society, United States is facing, specifically our younger generations. And so we see her have this very emotional, scared moment, and then we see this big pivot. We see her, I'm fine, I'm okay. And this introduces a persona of what is truth. Is it easier to say something online because you know it might garner a reaction, sentiment? Is it easier to be truthful in reality? Like where does that lie? Where does it end of who am I online versus who am I in real life? And what went over some at different times? Uni, is there anything else you'd want to contribute?
No, you said it beautifully. Mostly just looking at the disconnect, and it also relates to other people's perception of Gen Z. Like, which one are they actually perceiving? The playful girl who is making sure that she uses humor to mask her fear, or just the hysteria that is happening online. Like, there's so many parts to it. So this is to say that Gen Z is very complicated, and we just want to acknowledge that we might not be able to capture the entirety of Gen Z in this presentation.
I think once again, that reinforcement of humor, of having to deal with things such as school shooting and having to rationalize that. And I think a lot of us, it manifests in humor. For me, myself, I would say dark humor primarily, but definitely fluctuation. So I think that's something else to keep in mind with interacting with us. I think some people might see this and be honestly frightened of why is she so okay with that? But that is the reality that Gen Zers and other persons are having to deal with. So we'll move on to our next slide.
All right, so building up on the way we rationalize the realities that we live in, I'll just go over a few of the stressors for Gen Z. So compared with other generations, Gen Z is more likely to report stress on these topics. So the largest one is mass shootings. And this makes sense because a lot of Gen Zers right now are of school age, just left school, going into college, and just entered the workplace. And school is where most of the mass shootings happen. A lot of Gen Zers' friends are in school, and there's always that underlying fear of, am I next? Um, there's also the rise in suicide rates and the advent of climate change, or how widespread climate change has become. And it's important to note that like social media and mass media has accelerated these fears, mostly because it's so much easier to get access to them. It's so much easier to get news and get scientific journals, all that. There's also the separation and deportation of immigrants and migrant families in the US. As I showed previously, Gen Z is diverse. A lot of their parents, a lot of their relatives, grandparents are immigrants. And so this fear is even more pronounced within their generation. And finally, there's also the widespread sexual harassment and assault that's happening to Gen Z and some Gen Z might be doing. But the thing with that is the internet has made it possible that there are so much more avenues for sexual harassment to happen. It can be through social media, through text, through stalking. Just technology has made it so easy to harass people. And on to the next point, I'd like to start with I find it really beautiful that mental health has now become destigmatized. It's not completely destigmatized, but the stigma surrounding mental health has been lowered. So it's so much easier to go online, share your story, and people have compassion for you. They're there to help, they're there to listen and offer a system or offer support. And despite all that, Gen Z still report that they do not have excellent or good mental health. And within that, it really goes to show how the reality we are in, the times we live in, how much it affects the way we think, the way we live, the way we rationalize things even. Tyler, you can go to the next slide. And because of that, we chose a few defining moments. So these defining moments will kind of show what made Gen Z, or what things happened that built up our personalities, made us act the way we are. And this is to say that, sorry, disclaimer, this is not all encompassing. So there might be defining moments you think, oh, but what about this? We did not include it. It might not be in here because we had to pick and choose. There's only so much time and space. And there might be moments in here that you're like, oh, I don't know why this is here. But this is based on me and Tyler's lived experiences and realities as well. So just be mindful. There'll be a time later on where we ask what defining moments you have experienced. So that would be a time to share. And I'll start with the emergence of technology and the widespread of the internet. So that basically just changed the whole way the world can communicate, and more specifically, Gen Z. As a Gen Z, I got my first cell phone at 8 years old. I was able to connect with someone on the other end of the world in the snap of a finger. I have never had to worry about losing friends when I changed school because I knew that I could always find them online. So just technology in general, how easy it is to access information, how easy it is to communicate with people, and how easy it is to share my ideas, find other people who share my ideas.
And I think building off of that too, very much in contrast, my nana, who was a boomer, she shared with me that like back in her day, if you moved, you most likely were not going to ever see or talk to that person again. It was very much like that relationship was over. So when we also expand and look at media in general and how media evolves, we have Facebook. Facebook originally is for solely college students. So once that's accessible to the general public, you're having my nana's like, I'm finding all these old connections and stuff like that. And I think it can be very hard for us to rationalize at this point. But it was literally like you had to say goodbye before. And it's like now it's like relationships are ongoing and it's like it's not defined to just physical location. In addition, some other defining moments, I'll use this one as a branching point. However, the inauguration of the 44th president would be the first presidency election in which Gen Z could vote in. And I think this was a big turning point in Gen Z's momentum for social justice and political activism. And so I think some branching points was BLM movement gaining more momentum after the murder of George Floyd. We had a lot of protests. We had a lot of solidarity shown on physical scales, social scales. Within that, as Uni mentioned, with the increased emergence of new avenues of sexual harassment and violence, we have people sharing in the Me Too movement, showing more solidarity than ever. Alongside, I remember when same-sex marriage was what happened in 2016. I remember being on Twitter and it's just being like such a happy day, such a happy time. And I think a big component to establish with these defining moments is a lot of these movements were put in motion. So same-sex marriage, that the movement to get that in place started probably before me and Uni's time. However, we are kind of at the bookend of we're getting the celebration, we're getting the joy. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that these are pivotal moments. However, they were started by either ancestors, other change makers, disruptors, etc. And I think it calls for more of that fluidity and that generational knowledge, compassion, understanding, etc. Is like it keeps going. So I hope that we are able to provide defining moments for generational alpha that are going to be helpful and instrumental to their development as well. And so we're going to move into mass media, a huge other component of this presentation. And within that, I'm going to establish some of my favorite mass media examples, and Uni will do the same. And we're going to talk about the relationship with identity and our own relationships with them. So for me, I'm a TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Spotify girly, and I will always be a bookworm at heart. You're always a bookworm, even if you don't read a book that year. Don't let anyone shame you for that, okay? I'm gonna let you know right now. And so I think what's really cool about TikTok and YouTube is that I think our relationship with them is very much on the basis of it being user-generated content, in that you don't have to be Kim Kardashian, you don't have to be an influencer selling a product. You can be the person in math class who's failing math class, and you go viral overnight. For example, Freyog is on TikTok and he made a video just in his car of saying, it's how you act, it's how you act. And now he's on television shows. He did an ad for the dating app Bumble. So it's really, really cool. For Twitter, I know especially as an adolescent, like going on there and finding like communities that I felt like I belonged to, that also you can get real-time news updates from veritable and reputable organizations or persons. That played a big part for me, and just seeing like discourse as well. So that kind of leads into Spotify, and that something that I really enjoy is we just had our Spotify Wrapped actually today. So I think what's cool is seeing like how we consume media, like what does that look like? What is the cross connect? So for example, a lot of times on Spotify, you'll see on Twitter, they call them the trolls. They'll have discourse of who is paying for their streams, because that's a whole other component as well, is how is our technology and consumption changing. So for example, for music, before you had physical sales, so CDs, vinyls, etc. Ironically, vinyls are actually one of the biggest sales, so it shows that things things might fluctuate and they still have value in our society. However, the point I was trying to make initially, my mind will just go everywhere at times, is that we went from a very much a buying society with music to a streaming society with music. So it's interesting to see how technology advances and then the cross. So you'll have people on Twitter be like, "Oh, this person is paying for streaming," or they'll have fan pages dedicated to artists, and just the way that we consume things in general. So once again, within the music realm, songs used to be maybe a good 5-6 minutes. These days, I was listening to a song. The original song is 2 minutes and 10 seconds. There's a sped up version that is 1 minute and 50 seconds. So it shows like where's our attention spans at. Literally, you're going from 6 minute songs to a songs that are 1 minute and 50 seconds that are sped up. Or that a lot of times artists are releasing additional releases of songs that are just instrumentals. So I think it's cool of seeing how things are packaged, how we consume it. And I will turn it over to Uni. Oh, one more thing, I'm sorry, I did forget. Once again, relationship with media and evolution. So for example, we have BeReal and Instagram. What's really cool is I think it gives you insight into both generations that it was curated for. So Instagram was curated, I would argue, a bit more for the millennial, early Gen Zers. So it's very much about aesthetics, it's about getting the right picture, looking cute, etc. BeReal kind of tries to merge both of those. So I personally don't even have a BeReal. I feel like I'm too old for it, even though it is for my generation most likely. But it has where you take a picture of like what's going on around you, and then something that's taking a picture of your face. So something that you can kind of pose, and then something that is like authentic and real. So I think that's a big component of our Gen Z identity, is finding a balance of where can I bring myself in. And finally, I will turn it over to Uni. So thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. I'd like to note that it looks like a lot of the mass media examples we have here are social media, and that is mostly because of how digitized our world has become. There's obviously still like
my AirPods just died. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. So as I was saying, there's obviously print and physical mass media. So for instances, newspapers, magazines, and all that, but those also have digital counterparts. So we mostly focused on what Gen Zs are most likely to use. I don't think I've seen a single Gen Z, or I've encountered a single Gen Z who still reads the physical newspaper. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, what I'm going to go into next is books and literature in general. I love reading, but most of my reading tastes are like martial arts Chinese novels. So I rely on a community of kind-hearted translators who translate that into English for me. But the significance of like books and novels and stories to Gen Z is major. I remember Tyler and I looked into the most used reading platform for Gen Zers, and surprisingly, it is Wattpad. And Wattpad is a space for individuals to write their fan fictions, write their own stories, and share it with the rest of the Wattpad users. I was really into that when I was 13. And I'm not ashamed of it. But yeah, in the world we are in right now, there's so much input. There's so many TV shows that we might be like, I don't like the way that ended, or why did this not happen? Or you might even just think, let's say Harry Potter. You might not agree with the author, but you like the book. So you decide, I am going to change the way the story goes. So that's where fan fiction comes in and helps you write, or helps you create the narrative you want, and helps you make sense of reality in a way. If you would have liked more representation of your, like, let's say your sexuality or your race in a certain work, then you would write it yourself. And that's just creating things that are not available so that you can share it with others. There are also a lot of podcasts going around, in Spotify specifically, where people talk about their daily lives. They talk about topics that are hard to talk about, mental health issues, political issues, just general day-to-day life issues, as well as TV. I personally have not watched TV or cable in quite a while, but it is still there.
We have a wonderful GIF, too many great options and too little time. So honestly, just with that, we didn't even touch everything. And I think we can see how encompassing and overwhelming that mass media can be. And I mean, I think that's even more why it's important to pay attention because of our relationship with it and its integration into our society.
And I'll just go a little bit over the types of media that Gen Z uses. And a lot of this is social media because that's where we spend most of our time. But we can see here that YouTube and Instagram are some of the most used platforms. And just one thing is this graph uses the binary male female. We could not find one that was non-gendered like this, so that's just a little caveat. But yeah, YouTube and Instagram are some of the most used, and while Be Real is gaining traction, it is quite new, and Gen Z is still trying to desensitize or trying to move away from this really staged, really unrealistic lifestyle to something more authentic and sincere. And I would say that with YouTube, the reason why it's so popular is it has so many options. You could find a 15-second video of a funny frog on there, or you could find a 2-hour-long discussion on philosophy and the state of the world. So it has so many applications, so many avenues for learning, for finding your identity, for finding community that that you identify with. So yeah. And I'm pretty sure you've all heard, yeah, Gen Z is chronically online. They're always on their phone, get off your phones. And there is some truth to that. So this survey is from 2022, and it looks at the daily social media usage of Gen Zers. And as expected, more than around 38% of the respondents said that they spend more than 4 hours on social media every day. And that's compared to 80% of all US adults. And it's easy to just attribute this phone usage to mindless scrolling. But it's important to remember that there's so much more on social media than just mindless scrolling. There is learning opportunities. There is sharing your ideas, finding your identities, listening to other people's ideas, building social relations, so communicating with others. And onto communication. This one looks at the communication method that Gen Zers most use, and it is text messages. This can be over Messenger, Instagram texting, Snapchat, but most of communication is done through texting, followed by phone calls and social media. And while there are other forms of communication, I want to highlight that playing video games is also a form of communication. Just like sports was to previous generation, video games is the new way that we find friends, make connections if we are not, if we don't have the opportunities to, let's say, go to school or meet people organically. Video games are one of the biggest ways that people communicate, or Gen Zers communicate. And Tyler can talk about the GIF or the meme.
It's all about communication. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I think there's the irony in that, once again, the stereotype that we're always on our phones, but we're antisocial, but it's like, that's a big component of why that's why we're on our phones. Sometimes this is communication. And I think what's really cool is a lot of these they can be very intentional. Like, a lot of these are kind of like deep rooted groups of, there's a lot of times I've heard, we didn't talk about Discord, but a lot of people who will play games will have Discord chats in which they build lifelong friendships, and if you like, video games teach, if it's a team, two multiplayer, it teaches, teamwork, or it teaches problem solving, how you work through this. So I think this also expands on, I think previous generations were very STEM oriented, And once again, to give grace and to give insight, like to give the acknowledgement that that's what society valued. I think some of this shows that Gen Z is is really trying to be proponents for more of a creative or things that weren't seen as necessary or practical in the past. And so we have a cute little video right here about every Gen Z's brain.
No. Ooh. Yeah, that's the one.
And sometimes it is just easier to text, like, "Are you outside?" in a text message. And I'm just seeing how that has changed. During some practice sessions, Uni actually told me that it seems like I believe Boomer's generation would just kind of show up to your house, just go inside, be like, "What's up?" Gen Xers may just knock on your door, not really give you any notion before that they're coming. They'll at least knock with millennials being like, "Hey, I'm coming over," text, but still coming. And then lastly, Gen Z is kind of this very much, "Do you want me to come over? Is it still cool when I'm coming over like 5 seconds before the door? Like we've established I'm coming over, but I'm still like, do you want me to come?" So just kind of a cute little funny thing where it reinforces some things, but it's also okay to laugh at some of the things that are stereotyped against us. And so we're going to move on to the third section of our presentation, and this encompasses identity. So what is identity? And we're going to give you some time with this quote from James Garcia, one of the persons we'll reference in a little bit, and we'll give you a few moments to sit with this. And if this is needed to be read out loud, please let us know, and we can do that as well. Okay, I'll give us a few more seconds. All right, let's go ahead. So let's go ahead. Oops, I think, no, sometimes the slides will act a little wonky if we're being honest. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about identity. So these are some of the most, I would say, common types of identity that we discuss. I work within the DI field, and then Uni has as well. So when you work in this field, you hear a lot about these, but let's go ahead. So race and ethnicity, nationality, cultural/social, gender expression, sexuality, religious/spirituality, political, education, social/digital, ability/disability, age, and occupation. So these are some major components of identity. These are not the end all, And one cool thing to know is like your fingerprint, even if you're a twin, is unique to you. So I think what's important is like no matter what generation you are, you're valid, you're unique, and you're cool.
So we'll go into a little bit of a discussion before we move on to the next section where we actually explore how identity is formed within mass media. So we just want to get a feel of the room. If you can let us know what generation you're from, what form of mass media you grew up with, and which ones did you consume, whether that be the TV shows you watched that where you got your humor from, or like a specific song that was just it during your generation, and how has all of that contributed to defining your identity, as well as this is a bonus question, but how would you describe your identity to someone new? And when we talk about what has contributed to defining your identity, you can also mention some of the defining moments of your generation, or what you think are some defining moments in history that made you who you are. And I think the way we'll do this is you can raise your hand and we can call on to you one by one. We'll try to keep it not too long, but yeah. And I'll say that in our in-person conference in New Orleans, we had really great turnout. A lot of people shared their experiences, and it was super interesting to learn how different generations rationalize different events, and to see just how those events made them who they were. It was beautiful to see people sharing and all that. So we'd really love to hear from you all.
So if you would like to speak, please use the raise your hand feature or just place it in the chat and we'll call on you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes,
Darcy?
Darcy,
Okay,
yes. Much.
yeah.
Sorry about that. I was like scrolling through and trying to find someone.
You're good. Hi, I am Darcy, and I'm from the millennial generation, right on the cusp of Gen X, I should say. But as far as mass media, my general preferred one is Instagram a lot of the time, but I like Slack for hanging out with all my internet friends that I've made through the internet, but we're actually really close. So that's where I fit in more to the technology side of my generation, I think. And I used Twitter until it kind of fell apart recently. So I'll use it sometimes, but not a lot. But jumping back to the older side of my technological age, I did use a whole lot of AOL Instant Messenger back in the day. So hopefully that's a nice little blast from the past for some people on this call. But as far as contributing to defining identity, it's a really interesting place to be in sort of that gap between growing up without a phone, without social media, having the newspaper every day, and doing crossword puzzles with my dad, and having that to look forward to, and then now being on my phone for hours a day for the reasons that the two of you mentioned. It's learning opportunities, communicating, connecting, sharing information, and then but not having the paper version of handing it back and forth with maybe one of my kids with a crossword puzzle, but we're on the laptop doing that instead. And so finding ways to continue some of those traditions that I valued from when I was young and bridge from that to now, and kind of see that connection between generations, where there's a lot of differences, but there's still a lot of similarities too. And as far as describing identity to someone new, I'm Darcy. I'm me. I'm just, hi. How's it going?
Thank you, Darcy. That was really wonderful. And I think you really expanded on really that generational connection. So thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. And then I believe I saw Brianna's hand first, if I said that correctly. And then following that, we'll have Dana, if I said that correctly as well.
Hi, it's Brianna, but thank you for acknowledging and opening space for me to correct that. And I am a millennial, 92, but I feel like under my own personal stereotyping of our generations, that about 92, 93 is indeed the end of millennials before things got like really warped together. No judgment there to anybody that is after that, just saying what I assume to be my reality as far as a millennial. In thinking about the mass media that I consume the most right now, it's Instagram, but I was really Facebook heavy because I thought that was like the thing. We've definitely seen way too much advancement in my mind. I don't know how many social media outlets there are now. I don't like to navigate away from Instagram and Facebook. It's my comfort zone. And honestly, if I have to turn on the sound to watch anything, it bothers me. But all that to say, I was raised with a strong boomer and Gen X presence. So it is very much still a lot of traditional ways in which I navigate the world. So to me, I prefer interaction with people over being behind screens or having to utilize a screen or a phone. I'm still that person that calls instead of text. I I'd rather FaceTime you if we're really getting, you know, funky there, but that's about it. And how would I describe my identity to someone new? I'm a traditional millennial that also loves a good opportunity to be the rebel without a cause. So there's a wonderful hodgepodge of things happening in my life. And I'm also a little bit nervous about where technology and mass media are going from here. In my mind, we need to just hit a really nice pause button. There needs to be nothing else for like the next 10 to 15 years. Like, let's get acclimated with all the gizmos and gadgets that are out there. And also, if you ask me, I'm just not going to do it. So, I hope that answered all of your questions, and thank you for opening up the space. I hadn't thought about these questions in that regard before.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, actually, I think the question was not written here, but do you have like any defining moments in history that you feel like made you who you are today?
Defining moments in history. I don't know if it was a specific moment, but a 90s kid, I definitely grew up in that kidnapping era of like hyper awareness of surroundings, people, just how you interact and operate in social space. So to me, I feel like that was the biggest thing for me. And I have noticed that some of my friends, as we vary in age, not everybody has that. Like, I am super directionally prone. I was always brought up in the space of know where you are at all times, at someone's address to get home, someone's phone number to be able to call them in the event of an emergency. And I still operate in that same fashion now, even traveling out of the country. I'm like, my emergency contacts are taped to the back of my insurance card. Like, nobody needs to find these things or have my cell phone number or my cell phone passcode to figure out how to help me. Everything should be accessible to keep me safe. So that will be something that stands out to me in regards to a moment in history, I would say.
Thank
Oh
you.
God, I said a moment in history. I'm not that old.
Well, that is a moment in history. Like, it's a whole era.
I know. I just out loud it sounds weird.
I mean, I guess they all are moments of history, and I one, thank you for sharing, and I really want to kind of, I think, expand, and I'm great. One, thank you for thanking us. That's so nice. I think what is cool is that you expanded of, I think, of just technological advances, and like, what does that do to someone? Of, you're saying I'm a millennial, so closer, closer still to the one of the younger generations, and technologically it's so scary for you. Honestly, technology is scary for me sometimes. Like, I'm telling you, to be real, what is that? Oh, I think it was just sorry, I think there was a mess thing. Whatever. But I think it establishes of with technological evolutions and advances, are we making sure everyone is there? Are we making sure that it's accessible for everybody? If someone who's, a millennial is struggling with this, how do we consider Gen Xers or our boomers or traditionalists? I think it moves us to mindfulness and accessibility within that. So thank you so much for sharing. And then Dana, if I said that correctly.
Hello, yes, you did say that correctly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting us into this space. So to go over some of the questions, so I identify as millennial, and I also identify as like a 95 millennial. So like right on the cusp of like the Gen Z, which I think is interesting, like thinking about like previous comments and everything. And I think it's one of those things where sometimes I don't know what I count as, depending on like what years people choose to actually be the cutoff for millennial or Gen Z. And I think that definitely affects either like my relationship with media and also things that have happened in history, where I think they're actually very intertwined, right? Because I think like, oh, I remember AOL Instant Messenger, but I also remember the creation of Facebook and then the move for Instagram, TikTok, now like all of these different things. As for what I choose to consume, I have a Facebook, an Instagram, a Twitter, and I use Discord a lot in my personal life. However, I don't use Facebook or Instagram all that much anymore. I'm like a major lurker, right? Where I'm just like, oh, I want to see like what things are going on in people's lives, but I don't know how comfortable I am having that digital identity. Because the interesting thing that I think about is growing up, it was always like parents warning you, like, oh, don't like have people on the internet know anything about you in your real life. But I also think it's very interesting now because of that like community that you can find online where it's like, oh, like your fandom interests or like who you are outside of work. Sometimes it's like now you don't want like the people in your real life to find about your internet persona, right? And I think like that's just a very interesting divide to see in the different ways and navigating that space between the generations, because it's like how much of yourself are you putting out in your digital presence and how much of it are you choosing to keep to yourself, but also how much of your digital presence are you choosing not to integrate into sort of like your real life, your like in-person interactions. And I think that something else that definitely has come to mind with me is one time when I had I was experiencing like a similar webinar, people were talking about how in the Gen Z generation or millennial generation, one of the cutoff points is like how closely you remember the events of 9/11, and how that sort of like affected your view of things, whether it be like the choices that the government makes or otherwise, right? And I also think, for example, being on Twitter, right, having that sort of, especially with the impact of like social media and the Arab Spring and everything that happened after that, being able to engage in like having now this distrust for broadcast media that we're seeing now, right, and having that sort of like, what information do you trust when the globe is so connected? And I think that's definitely a way in which like media, globe, politics, and identity all sort of like create an interesting space to navigate for everybody. As for me and how I would describe myself to someone new, I always introduce myself as like a queer Filipino American woman. I think that whole identity package and all the intersectionality of that is like so important for people to know about me. And I also think it contributes from the sense of like previously a lot of times I was told to push those identities down, but now I'm like, no, you should know what you're getting into, and I should know what I'm getting into, right? So that's why I always like introduce myself with that full package. And I do hold those identities like very closely to me because of that like attachment to social justice and honesty and transparency, and also being authentic as I can. So yeah, I hope that answers all your questions, and I really appreciate the space to discuss it because I think it's a really interesting space for reflection. Thank you all.
Thank you. You actually, one of the things you said, one of your last points, about kind of all the systems converging is actually something we're about to get into. So that was really a cool setup for that. And I think something, what you mentioned is kind of, I'm gonna just say, lostness, I guess. And actually, when we did it in person, that was kind of another thing someone had said of what happens when you are in between, when you're on the like a cusper. And I think what you reference is like, how do you identify identity through so many, like it's compounded. If we're saying just that you're born, how do you identify who am I? What happens when you're a person who has a disability? What happens when you're a person of color? When you're a queer person of color? When you are living in poverty, just all those different sort, like how there's the intricacies. And I think that's why this feels very human. It feels very relevant and immediate because this is about our lives. I would say we would have time for about one.
Tyler, there's some in the chat, so we can just talk about some of those first.
Thank you. Uni, I'll let you read the chat if you want to.
Okay. First I'll answer Jessica. So class and socioeconomic status is also part of identity. We just didn't focus much on it, but it definitely is in there. And as Tyler mentioned, whether you're in poverty or not, that kind of affects the way you see things and the way you interact with people and places and events as well. UAA mentioned that they're millennial, and that media has given them a lexicon for describing and understanding identity, or media is giving youngsters nowadays the words to say who they are, to describe who they are. And I think that is very true. It does not only give us space or us the words to like describe ourselves, but also gives us the space and guidance on how to find out who we are, how to do that safely, and how to do it within a community that supports you. But yeah, Tyler, did you say we had time for one more?
I would say we would have at least time for one more if we could have another person who feels comfortable sharing. Dr. Lander.
Hey, first of all, super proud of y'all, but I'm not gonna rant. Hi, hey everyone, Dr. Tia Lander. I am also here with my child who is an Alpha Gen. And so a piece of, well, sorry, buddy. A piece of what my headphones are. Okay, well, dang, hold on. A piece of this, I think, is I agree with a lot of folks. I identify as a millennial, born in '86, raised by boomers. Mommy's talking, they're not talking. Raised by boomers. And I'd say a huge defining moment was 9/11, but also like I remember the transition from chat rooms and kind of this idea of like this is how we interacted with folks, and then Gmail, Hotmail, like it was an explosion of technology and the way that we communicated with folks. And I was a military brat, so I lived overseas. So I think someone earlier, you all were speaking in your presentation earlier around like how do you how like you can't connect with people, right? When we wrote letters for like a month and then it was like, ooh, this is old snail mail, we can only do so much of. And then when Facebook came on the scene, I was a freshman in undergrad, and it was pitched as this really cool opportunity. And so I just, I think that I think for me as a parent now, the access to education, the access to technology is really troubling, right? I think sometimes, and so there's two parts. One, as a parent, I'm like, good night. How do I police this? But also, how do I learn as much as I can so I know how to teach my children how to actually utilize this tool? And then the other aspect of it is as a professional, as a professor, and as an administrator, as an executive, I think about, how do we include AI? Because the world is changing and we do really need to be technologically savvy and not afraid of it. But then I also, as I guess a lightweight conspiracy theorist, I'm like, well, we can't turn into Ready Player One, right? If y'all have read the book or seen the movie, we don't want to live on the internet and forget that we have real lives. And so I think there's a lot of nuance to it. But I really enjoyed listening to the way you all have brought in like kind of that dark humor and just the nuance of generations that I don't know that we're always talking about. I'd say I self-identify as a Black feminist equity scholar, as a parent, as a mother, as a mother scholar. I'm very much so connected to my identity as a Black woman, my gendered and racialized identity, along with my professional identity as well. And so being able to define that and being bold, I think one thing that my Gen Z students and colleagues have taught me is that you can be unapologetic and it'll be okay. And so I think that there's something to learn from as we kind of shift. I appreciated the person, I forget their name, that said, you don't need to have my phone number. If I'm traveling overseas, you have access to me because, I'm making sure that you do if my phone is indisposable. Anyway, I feel like I'm ranting at this point and my child is doing what he wants to do. So anyway, great work, y'all.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. So that will move on. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I'm sorry if you hear a phone ringing in the office, life is happening. And so thank you for sharing. I think this literally is I wish we could, even do a whole section on what are these questions? What does that look like? We didn't have anyone who was a traditionalist, boomer, or Gen Xer. So what is their experience? It shows you how wide range and valid these experiences are and sentiments towards media identity is. So we are going to move on. So thank you all for sharing. And we're going to go ahead and get into our mass media and identity frameworks. So we have four theories, frameworks for you here. We have Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, James Marcia's theory of identity status, heuristics, and reinforcing spiral model. We chose these four because they felt very much like they built on each other, they converged on each other, they felt very much of aligning of either references to media or references to identity self behaviors. And also you can see it in our culture. So let's go ahead and get into Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. There's a lot going on here. So just bear with me. I will say we're going to be focusing more in context of media on the exosystem, but we will go briefly through the other sections. So we have our microsystem, which is our daily interactions with those at home, those at work, etc. So who you're seeing on the daily routine. Our mesosystem, so relationships found in the microsystem that can affect our experiences in external places. So if, let's say, I know at a work event, like we typically do this, and I'm going to be at a volunteer event, I might have some of the same like ideas or perspectives on some of the things we've done at work at in those spaces. Then we move on to our exosystem, so factors that affect an individual's life through indirect means. So this is what we're referring to our mass media. So maybe one of your parents saw a commercial that says, your favorite cereal is Frosted Flakes, right? Your parent sees a commercial that says Frosted Flakes are bad for you. It's Special K. I mean, I honestly, this is probably my life. I hate Frosted Flakes, but I remember my mom got in a Special K cake. So your parent, buys this because of some media exposure or things that our local governments are saying or external factors. So the exosystem is kind of things a little bit on the outside, but they still will impact they have a direct, like it seems indirect, but they will have an impact on your actual life. We have our macro system, which is the society or culture that you belong to. So something that's been really cool is like my relationship with Uni is sometimes we'll kind of discuss some things that are different in our societies. And sometimes it can seem really jarring, but cool. But it's really like it could be food, it can be fashion, it could be. I was just watching a YouTube video the other day of just cussing in general. I'm a person who cusses. I'm kind of surprised I haven't used any in this presentation, so that's cool. But the context was that those societal like norms, etc. And lastly, it did get cut off here. I'm so sorry, but we have our chrono system. You can see it here in the purple. And that's referencing to lived experiences or just like life happening that will also affect your development. And so altogether, while we are focusing more so on the exosystem, these are all holistic and they all encompass of identity formation and development. And another component, which Uni will get into, is that it's not fixed. Like there's room for growth, there's room for nuance, etc. So we'll move on.
All right, so we'll start with a little meme. The face you have when someone asks you meet someone for the first time and they're like, so tell me more about yourself, and you're just loading because you forgot who you are. You forgot like, oh, what's my name? What do I like? What am I studying? That kind of thing. So that just goes to say that identity is not fixed. It is something that changes, and the stages of identity that you go through also changes. So James Marcia has a really good way of describing the stages a person goes through when they try to establish their identity. So there's 4 stages and 3 strands of identity development. So before I go into the statuses, I'll expand a little bit more on the strands of identity development. And these strands are basically things that you as an individual try to balance as you fall into your identity. And one of them is authenticity. When you're exploring and looking for your values, your core beliefs, things that you like, how you like to express yourself, you want to keep authenticity at the forefront. And despite wanting to be authentic, there's also a certain component of social desirability and acceptance that you are seeking. So a word that I really like to use is palatable. Most people, when they fall into their identity, they try to be as authentic as possible while still maintaining that aspect of, I am still palatable. I'm still going to be accepted into society in general when I go into those spaces, or not even into society as general, but into the society of the identity you're going into. So, for example, you identify as punk, for example, and within that community that is already very special, you want to be accepted into that, or you want to be socially desirable within that. And there's also an aspect of personal and social evaluation. So you want to make sure that the identity you're choosing correctly or accurately depicts who you feel you are, and how you portray yourself socially also depicts that to a certain extent. So James Marcia's 4 identity statuses are identity diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement. So to go into those stages, I'll briefly explain them, and then in the next slide, there will be like a progression of how a person would cycle through those different stages. So diffusion is when a person is not looking for an identity. So they haven't settled on an identity. They are not exploring identities out there. They're not really introspecting and thinking, oh, what are my core values? What are the things that I like? What kind of community do I identify with? Foreclosure is when they have not done the exploration, but they have committed to an identity. And this is mainly seen in identities that are imposed on you. So for instance, if your parents are religious and you inherit that religion and you take that as part of your identity, that's identity foreclosure if you haven't explored different options out there. Identity moratorium on the other side is when you have not committed to identity, but are still exploring the options out there. And finally, identity achievement is the end all be all of I am settled and I know who I am. So Tyler, next slide, please. As we said before, those stages are not fixed, they're not permanent, and people go through a cycle when they try to make an identity for themselves. And throughout this, I'll also kind of explain how mass media affects each stage. So identity diffusion, you're not looking, you don't know who you are. You might see things online, you might be scrolling and be like, oh, this is interesting, but you're not actively thinking, oh, I identify with this, or I think this is who I want to be. And then you go into identity foreclosure, and that's where you decide, oh, I think I want to identify as something, or I think this is going to be one of my core values. And here you see a lot of, if you're on social media, you'll see a lot of people that look like what you're looking to become, or your stage in life changes. So for instance, you go from high school to college, and then the identity you thought you had gets flipped on its head, and you have to keep looking again. So there's this mama cycling, which is the stage of going from settling on an identity and then exploring again. So you settle, something changes, you keep on exploring. And here the role of mass media is to provide you a stage or a platform for exploring different voices and ideas that you can listen to make your decision, as well as basically somewhere where you can express your ideas and get feedback as well. And finally, once you go through all that cycling, there's the affirmation and validation stage of where you're like, oh, okay, this is who I am. And it's important to note that identity achievement is not the end all be all. A major change in your life can bring you back to identity diffusion, and that's where midlife crisis come from, quarter life crisis come from. You suddenly go from knowing who you are, being settled in your own identity, to being like, what am I doing with my life? Is this who I want to be? All that things. And a little bit about heuristics. Heuristics has a lot more relationship with mass media, and it's more about how we interact with the inputs that we get, or how we make sense of inputs and how we make sense of outputs as well. So there's the availability heuristics, and this plays into stereotypes, the influencers and celebrities we see, as well as identity exploration. So this basically helps you, what's the word? Not really settle, but explore different identities and understand other people's identities as well. So as I said, stereotypes, Gen Z has stereotypes, let's say anime lovers have stereotypes, all that. So what is available to you is what you will internalize and basically regurgitate. Then there is representativeness heuristics, and these are like diversity and visibility. Do you see your identity online? Do you see someone who looks like you in the movies that you watch? Do you see your ideas being shown on the news? Do you see your values being represented in all sorts of medias? And then anchoring and adjustment heuristics talks about the personal narratives and social comparisons. So this is more into, you find a role model that you're like, I identify with this person, and you will latch onto that and basically make sure that you follow onto that train of thought and I won't say devolve, but make that your personality kind of thing. And finally, simulation heuristics is exploring alternative identities. So although you've settled on an identity, there's still room for exploration. And online games have made this really possible these days. For instance, in Sims, I used to play Sims. There's so many opportunities to become someone else. Other types of games where you can play simulations and all that. You can explore like, how does it feel to be a businessman in Sims? Or how does it feel to be a musician that has 3 children and 2 wives in Sims? That kind of thing. Yeah, and I think Tyler will expand a bit more on how these converge with the next theory.
Thank you, Uni. And so we have our last theory, the reinforcing spiral model. So this model is in relation, I would say, is either siblings or cousins to cultivation theory. And so cultivation theory, also, sorry, there's some spacing, some messed up spacing on here. Just so you know, we're so sorry about that. However, with cultivation theory, it's kind of the reinforcement of, if I keep seeing, specifically in reference to violent media, so violent video games, violent television, etc. If I keep seeing it, it will reinforce my idea of the world is unsafe because I continuously see on games like Grand Theft Auto or the news that the world is a dangerous place, that there's shootings, etc. So the reinforcing, like I said, is kind of cousin or sibling to that. And so within that, it expands on, if we stay in a homogenous community, our ideas are going to continue to be reinforced. So if you saw on that previous slide, we have Beyonce. So I'm going to use her, and she works perfectly for this slide and what comes after. And so Beyonce's fans call themselves Beehive, right? So the bees, really cool, really, really passionate people. A lot of other artists, I call them stans. That's kind of like a pop term, a general pop term, internet term for people, stans. So if you only consume Beyonce all day, you don't let any other artist in, you're going to say Beyonce is the best artist in the world, probably, right? Uni is a big fan of BTS. If she only listens to BTS, not only will they most likely be the best K-pop band, they will become the best band to her in the world. If we're not letting any room for error, any other ideas in, it's going to just continue to reinforce that idea. So as we can see with these internet communities, which is really, it's very twofold. It's very great to be able to pick, I'm in this community, I feel validated, etc. However, there's the mindfulness of, I'm in this, is there any other way, any other way of thinking, or does this group allow other feedback or other identities of, yes, I love Beyonce, yes, her music's great, but an artist such as Britney Spears is also wonderful, also great music. And so within that, typically people are able to reach a place of homeostasis of, I'm a BTS stan, I'm a Beehiver, this is where I'm so in, I'm ingrained, but to this level. However, sometimes you are going to have sometimes you will have some outliers. And so it kind of gets to a point of I guess you could say maybe like a fizz bottle, right? Of you'll have a lot of people who will kind of like time out, right? But if you open the bottle too fast, it will fizz out. You'll have the outliers who you can also call them extremists who, yes, they're a Beyonce stan, but they'll take it to like a whole different level. And so it's this, I would honestly say this theory is a little bit hard sometimes conceptually to explain, but the video we'll watch soon will show you, I need to say it's explicit and it is a dramatized way to show this, but it shows you kind of like what happens if you go too far in a homogenous culture.
Tyler, before you go into the video, I'd also like to mention that social media nowadays had made the reinforcing spiral so much more harder to get out of, mainly because of the algorithm. Like your recommended is if you watch one thing, let's say you look at one video on how to make bread, your feed is going to be about bread for like the next 3 days. So it's very hard to get out of that and like look for different perspectives unless you're actively doing it. So that's one thing to consider. Technology has not made it easy because they want to keep you engaged, they want to keep you scrolling. So they know what is comfortable, what's familiar, and they try not to get you out of that comfort zone.
Thank you. Literally, the chronic accessibility and the chronic reinforcement. And another thing, another statistic, I don't exactly remember what this one is. I'm so sorry. However, there was a statistic saying that Gen Z feels more pressure to appear on social media in comparison to other generations. So I think a component is why are we on our phones? That's kind of expectation, and within that, you are going to be a bit more susceptible or vulnerable because that is you. There's that reinforcement of, oh, I need to be online, right? Versus millennials, they might feel like I can dip in, I can dip out, right? Generation Z, no, we have to have a presence. And so our next clip is from a TV show called Swarm. It's on Amazon Prime. Super great, I would really say. I do need to acknowledge that it has explicit language. It does kind of set the scene up for violence. However, we won't get to that point. And so in reference to what we just talked about, so all of them, we talked about how identity can form. So this show called Swarm, it follows this character through different kind of arcs of their life. It's really cool. However, the basis is this character is a stand for a person who I would say is akin to Beyonce. And so it shows you of what, like I said, even on Twitter earlier, I referenced how some people will sit here and say, oh, BTS pays for their streams, Beyonce pays for her streams, etc. So it shows you of what will happen if someone goes against who someone will say is beloved, right? This character, well, let's just go ahead and get into the video. But think of this as if this is Beyonce.
Is your favorite
Captions.
artist? Huh? Gibble. How many Grammys does Lil Gibble have?
No, I don't know.
None. Naja has 26. Do you think Little Gibble is better than Naja?
No.
He is not. He is a pedophile who uses the same melody for every song. He couldn't write a hit song without a feature to save his life. He is nothing. But Naja, she's everything. You think you're too good for Naja?
No, I don't want to. Please, I don't.
Then why did you say she couldn't keep a man happy?
I didn't say that. I didn't.
But you did. And I got the receipts.
Nigga. Twitter.
So that is Swarm. Once again, really recommend it. However, I think it encapsulates a lot of things of yes, let's acknowledge that this is dramatic. However, what we've been talking about is the presence of social media. This goes into Generation Z's values of if we're basing off of this conversation of a component is she's comparing her beloved artist to an artist who is a pedophile. So it's like, what is Gen Z's presence in activism and standing up for what's right, for what's just? She uses references to the quality of the music of do they have Grammys? Do they have features? A lot of things in the music scene is, for example, K-pop is such a big industry. If you there's a lot of discourse if you collaborate with a K-popper that your song will chart at least like top 10, right? If there's a collab, like I think Lotto collabed with someone from BTS and she scored her first top one, you know, so it references a lot of those things and it might be a little bit confusing because it does reference a lot of internet culture, but it also shows how Gen Z has to be so aware of I have the receipts. It's not like, oh, this is gone. It's like, no, I have a digital footprint. And we're having it very dramatized here, obviously, with a murder, but these are very real conversations online. I've seen discourse like this. And I think it does show if with our media consumption and how much is too much. How do we go too far? And so if we explore here, kind of just yes, we did give you kind of a darker, more dramatic lens on what can happen with stan culture, with homogenous reinforcement culture. However, we do want to provide you that media in all of its forms is like it can be a very, very powerful tool, whether it's exploring ideas, whether it's highlighting voices who are marginalized and haven't been heard, whether it's learning how to interact with yourself or with others, develop your own content, establishing who are role models, who are pivotal people in communities that we should look up to or aspire to be. Uni, anything else?
Just it's also really great at seeing alternative identities. So like all these YouTube videos about a day in my life, if that is something you are wondering about, like, oh, career choice, for instance, what would it be like to be a musician or an actress or have a desk job? You can experience all of that through the comfort of your own phone and your own room through media. And yeah, as Tyler, I think Tyler, you said most of it, but there's so much opportunity that media provides, but it's also important to be aware that it can be dangerous. And yeah, just be mindful and be vigilant.
Thank you, Uni. And we leave you with this featuring Victoria Monet and Ariana Grande. So thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone. We appreciate our facilitators. We appreciate our interpreters, and we appreciate all of you for being here. And I'm very grateful to Uni and the research that this is our first year of researching together. So please stay tuned, and we hope to just improve our understanding and provide more opportunities for experiences such as this. Oh, and definitely I need to show our sources. There's a session evaluation if this is still accurate. Please let us know where we can improve, what we can strengthen, etc., what you liked. And then here are our works cited. Like I said, there was one statistic, I don't remember where we got it from. So please forgive me. But it did not come from my head, just so you know. And then our second works cited page. So thank you all so much. I guess if we have time for a Q&A, because I know we kind of went a little bit over. Will the slides be shared? I'm not sure that approach, how we've done that. I previously I kind of just sent someone an email and I was told like I need to protect our content a little bit more. So definitely I don't know what that looks like, but please reach out to us if anything we can share once we have like, you know, stuff like that taken care of. I ramble a lot, but thank you. Yeah.
So first, thank you, Uni and Tyler, for your expertise and your content. It was fantastic. We are at 4:28, so we don't have enough time for questions, but I just wanted to just some of the things that resonated with me is I like how you put an emphasis on how the perspectives of generations change as the generations get older. So I thought that was very interesting. It gave me a lot to think about. Also, the intersectionality of being a zillennial, like that was brilliant, brilliant, like chef kiss. And also, thank you for giving me a scientific approach for my Beyonce fandom because you know it opens this week, and so I will be reinforcing that spiral model several times this weekend. And I might say that in the audience. But the way that you all put the information together, the way that you provided it and presented it, it was just spectacular. And we really appreciate you coming to share yourselves, share your work, share your passion. It was fantastic. And you could see it in the way that you all presented it and gave us that information. So round of applause. Yes. Excellent job. So we will see you all in January, hopefully. Enjoy your winter break and bye-bye.
Bye.
Uh,